Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. The transformational nature of God's grace is quite simply extraordinary. The fact that you and I are loved unconditionally, that is what grace is, by the God of all creation, is something I often struggle to get my head around. I marvel in wonder that I, a much less than perfect human being, living in a damaged and broken world, is not only surrounded by this divine grace, but that I can experience personally this grace working its miracle of transformation in me. Friends have traditionally recognized this inner transformation, this manifestation of the grace of God as being initiated by the inward light of Christ, or that of God in everyone, which has its biblical basis in John 1:9. I suspect some of you are already wondering, did you turn up to the wrong talk organised by FWCC? Surely Simon was meant to be talking about the world we are now in and what we can do as Quakers today, not some theological lecture on early Quaker beliefs. And yet we as friends have from our very beginning believed that the unconditional love of God is what must drive us out into the world. As William Penn so aptly put it over 300 years ago, true godliness don't turn men out of the world, but enables them to live better in it and excites their endeavours to mend it. In these very unusual times, where the global community is not only struggling with a debilitating pandemic, which is affecting every one of us through its health, its social and its financial impact, we are also at the same time being challenged by the protests of many on the issues of long entrenched patterns of cultural, racial and social inequalities and the historical values that underpin such ideas. We are being limited in our capacity to meet each other face to face. Social distancing is becoming a very normal part of our lives in these abnormal times. We are learning new ways to communicate, to socialize, and even to worship. The period of health crisis for almost every country on this planet and the impending financial disaster that it promises in the months to come for many of the world's citizens leaves friends with the challenging question as to what we are able and what we are called to do. What are friends as a whole and the FWCC as the primary global body for friends called to do today? These are not questions we're just started asking. Over 40 years ago, I attended my first FWCC event in Kaimosi in Kenya in August in 1982. At it, the keynote address was given by a young pastor and theologian from Northwest Yearly Meeting in Oregon. In that address, Donald A. Green challenged us with the following words. I believe that around the world this day there are friends who earnestly desire a fresh work of the Spirit to be done among us. I am one of them. I believe that we are here because deep within us all we have the gentle whisperings of the Spirit that in fact our time together is somehow attached to the renewal of our calling as friends. We are disenchanted with the fruitlessness of depending on our own wisdom, our own planning, and our own strength. We are discontent with retelling stories of our Quaker forebears' victories as we are hearing of their defeats. We are thirsty, a timidness in us about holding out our cups. The transforming power of the love of God is that which seeks to work its purpose in us. It is this that both gives us our thirst and will satisfy our thirst. What Don Green understood back in 1982 was that we, the people called friends, are not content to simply accept the state of the world as it is. We understand the need for change, for transformation. We desire to make things better, but despite our recognition that change is needed, we often hold back because of a lack of courage or a fear of what consequences change might bring, both for us personally and for society as a whole. Yet, on an individual level, this desire drives us to care for neighbours who are in need during this pandemic, to do shopping for the elderly so they can stay safe at home, or to do what African friends are doing in raising money and providing masks and sanitizers for rural communities, clinics and Quaker hospitals across East Africa. But at a global level, what can an organisation like FWCC do? Of course, a global body like ours has to tackle things differently from the way individuals might act. And yet we must be driven, just like individual friends are, by the same unconditional love of God that permeates us as individuals. In the period following the World Conference in Kabarak in Kenya in 2012, FWCC has been moving its focus to a series of priorities we believe are critical to the future direction of the organisation, and which we believe speak to the global calling of friends. Probably the clearest and strongest message to come out of Kabarak was the renewed awareness and vigorous burden to do all we can to nourish and preserve God's glorious creation, which has resulted in the establishment of a sustainability worker based at our World Office, and an active, ongoing global dialogue among friends of all traditions about the critical issues related to climate change and the many ongoing risks to our planet. Another major strand of concern which has been developing in FWCC in recent years is one that was raised by a Bolivian young friend in our Central Executive Committee in Rwanda in 2017. Supported by Kenyan friends, he challenged the committee to the issue of historical, cultural, social and racial attitudes, both within and outside the Religious Society of Friends, which has resulted both from colonial and general social attitudes which still exist today. He explained the impact such ongoing values have on the attitudes and choices his friends with a capital F and friends with a small f make in Bolivia. Out of this personal concern, the Central Executive Committee saw the need to accept the challenge given us to help friends globally to engage with this issue, and in recent years we've been trying to find funding to establish a similar work to the one we've been doing on sustainability in recent years. The urgency of both these strands of work have become ever more clear to those of us involved with FWCC as we have watched the unfolding events of the past few months. And I feel clear that God is calling us as a global Quaker community to get on with this work, helping both the global friends community and the rest of society to understand the interrelatedness of these various issues. The idea of a global Quaker community brings me to my third and every bit as critical part of the work of FWCC that I want to mention today. Ever since I was a Quaker on a Quaker youth pilgrimage as an 18-year-old and travelled round the multiple varieties of Quaker traditions in America, I have been both challenged and inspired by this variety. As a friend who grew up in the evangelical unprogrammed tradition of Ulster Quarterly Meeting within a more diverse Ireland yearly meeting, I was aware of the fact that not only was this diversity challenging and enriching, but that most yearly meetings and Quaker groups I encountered were by their theological nature imbalanced or lopsided, perhaps even damaging or damaged in one way or another. I also realized that only in being compared to the spiritual well-being in another tradition, were the theological strengths and weaknesses in my own tradition laid bare. But more importantly, I realized that only when friends meet and work together, particularly under the care of FWCC, did friends' theology, testimonies, and social witness become revealed in all their full richness and wholeness. Each yearly meeting and tradition hold part of the God-given message of transformation that early friends brought to the world more than 350 years ago. But I have yet to find any yearly meeting that provides the whole. That is why FWCC plays such a vital role in the global community of friends. By sharing the burden of carrying God's message to a broken world, we not only bring a full message, but one that's worth hearing for that world. The final point I want to mention is a challenge that many friends across the globe are facing at this time. It's the issue of end-time theology. During this pandemic, fear has become a strong component in humanity's thinking. And friends' churches in Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere face the challenge from other churches preaching a mixture of fear and quick fix solutions built around the idea that of this being the time of Christ's second coming. Friends, while we recognize the biblical promise of Christ's second coming as part of our historical theology, have throughout our history put our emphasis on living our faith and our relationship with the living inward Christ here and now, rather than living in some expectant hope for the future. We see the second coming of Christ as also being revealed in our transformed lives in this moment. Our Quaker belief that we are called to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth in the here and now is upheld in knowing that the transforming power of the love of God changes lives. God's kingdom can come if we are but obedient servants. FWCC is presently exploring the possibility of establishing a theological working group to provide materials that might help with the theological challenges friends globally face on such issues. Can I finish with this? Whether you're a homemaker or on the staff of the Quaker United Nations office in New York or Geneva, whether you are a yearly meeting clerk or studying software design at a university in Bujumbura, whether you're unemployed or like me running a small bakery in Northern Ireland, like early friends, you can experience the transforming power of the grace of God and be used for divine purposes. And this brings me back to where I started. John Woolman, one of those many early friends whose thoughts and actions have inspired me throughout my life of faith, wrote in his journal that he was prompted by the light of Christ within to go and spend some time with the Native American community. To explain all these promptings, Woolman simply wrote, "Love was the first motion." Woolman was challenged to act, driven by the transforming nature of God's unconditional love. And we are called to act likewise.